Welcome to the 12th Annual Air Quality and Health Workshop, held in Vancouver, put on by the British Columbia Lung Association. I'm Veda Peters, staff with BC Lung Association, and I have with me Jerry Dombowski, who is from the city of Kelowna, and we are going to talk about mobility issues as they are faced and overcome, hopefully,
Great.
In a small community like Kelowna. So the issues.
Well, I think obviously there are all kinds of issues in small communities. One of them is, I believe, a matter of scale, and that is when you're trying to apply mobility solutions to a small community, it's not a one-size-fits-all. What works in a larger major metropolitan center might not necessarily work in a smaller center. And an example would be something like park and rides, and that's based upon commute times. There could be a distinct advantage, for example, in a major metropolitan center to have a park and ride where you have a bus that can access an HOV lane, maybe different elements of ITS or transit signal priority that would allow you to have a time advantage over driving your vehicle. And in the smaller centers where commute times might be a lot smaller, a lot shorter, I should say, but if it's a 20-minute commute time, the difference between those two is going to be very small. So you have to take that into account and adjust your programs accordingly. Another key factor is the pricing, things like the pricing of parking. Pricing of parking in small communities is usually it's not usually a huge deterrent for people to travel by vehicle to these areas, not to the same extent as it would be in the major met centers. In fact, a lot of employers in small communities offer parking to their employees for free. So to counter that, municipalities can do things within the city of Kelowna itself. Council has adopted a policy which says that the minimum monthly charge for any parking stall that the city owns and operates has to be 10% higher than the cost of an adult monthly bus pass. So what that says is that to somebody, logically, you're saying, gee, the minimum price that I'm going to pay for parking alone is going to be, higher than the cost of buying a bus pass. And then there's all those other costs that come into effect, like maintenance of your vehicle, fuel, et cetera. Some of them are sunk costs. Obviously, if you own a car, you still have to pay insurance and that sort of thing. But I think it's important that we recognize that small communities don't have the same sort of dynamics in that sense, especially when it comes to items like parking and
like
distance of travel.
$3.75 for half hour.
So it's not much of a it's not much of a disincentive when your parking is free compared to that. So those are the factors that come into effect in terms of scale. Other issues, capacity. Sometimes there are technology solutions or technical solutions to problems, but the implementation of them come at a high cost or a high scale. So when we look at things like, an example could be transit. If we're looking at technological solutions like AVL, now what AVL does is it gives you a sort of next bus application that you can access on your smartphone or your computer, and you can tell in real time where any bus is. It really adds to the rider convenience and their comfort level in terms of knowing they don't have to go out to a bus stop until it's available, or until it's on its way and they know it's going to be coming to that location. And it just increases customer satisfaction. On the other side, it's very, very valuable, in fact, probably more valuable as a tool for data to make decisions based upon, because you can look at actual real-time performance and analyze where issues occur within your transit system itself. Great system. However, implementing a system like this in a small system, there's a high front-end fixed cost. So, if the cost of a system is spread over a large major metropolitan area, then on an overall cost per rider basis or a cost recovery basis, it might look like a better investment. So you have to take that into consideration. It doesn't mean that these technology solutions shouldn't be applied to the smaller communities. I think they're very valuable, and that's really what's going to gain us the most traction in terms of increasing ridership and increasing revenues and cost recoveries in our service.
And how do you take into account future growth for the community as it applies to your policy for active transportation or mobility issues?
So for future growth, the way that we address it in the Central Okanagan is through transportation demand management. And in transportation, there's really two sides to responding to a growth in either population or the increase in the demand for, or an increase in the supply of vehicles using roadways, et cetera. The traditional solution is to build more infrastructure, build more roads, build more bridges, build more parking, et cetera. The transportation demand management side says, no, let's look at the demand side as opposed to increasing the supply. So let's make better use of our existing resources. Let's try to shift behaviors and attitudes so that people adopt more sustainable forms of transportation, you know, things like transit, cycling, walking, carpooling, car share, et cetera. And that's something that the Central Okanagan we've applied. You know, it started back in 1995 when we implemented this in TDM principles into official community plans and transportation management plans. In 1998, we developed a TDM plan, which saw the creation of a full-time staff function for the whole Central Okanagan region to tackle these things over the long run, because we knew that we couldn't sustain the type of increase in demand and the population growth pressures without building our way out of the problem. And it's a bit of a double-edged sword in that building to accommodate future growth and to attract more people, in fact, it creates exactly what people don't want and what they came to get away from. In other words, in a smaller community, you know, like the Okanagan, a lot of people choose to move there for lifestyle reasons. And we've done some pretty detailed research on it, too, and found out that the attitudes of that people, they love the area, they love the environment, they love the ability to get around freely, they love the ability to walk, to cycle, to do those things. But if we're accommodating this growth through increasing supply, you know, we're really, in a sense, we're killing the goose that laid the golden egg.
Well, I have to say that for me personally, it sounds as if managing it from changing people's attitudes and working from a demand point of view sounds much more balanced and very much more reasonable than supplying more roads and vehicles.
Yeah, well, it seems more reasonable, but it is an uphill battle. You know, we're fully aware that we have an extremely high, in our case, in the Central Okanagan, we have an extremely high demand for single occupant vehicle and a really high ratio. In fact, you know, based on the Transport Association of Canada, a study they conducted a few years ago, we're the highest in terms of per capita vehicle ownership in many of those categories. So we recognize that, you know, we do have this problem. We know that that transportation demand management can be part of the solution, but changing attitudes and behaviors can be done in a number of ways. Our approach has really been a carrots versus sticks approach, and that is to apply things like social marketing to try to address barriers and try to change people's attitudes. But the reality is that some of the most effective ways to change people's behavior are those sticks. So it's by implementing aggressive parking pricing. It's by implementing congestion pricing. It's by introducing things like tolls on roadways. And a lot of these things are really big city solutions. So how do you take that big city solution and move it to a small community? And that's the challenge. And I think we're doing it a little bit by bit. As I mentioned earlier, if it comes to parking pricing, there are many, many areas within the central Okanagan where parking is abundant and it's free. So it's a pretty major shift, but it's a little bit at a time. And in the city of Kelowna itself, we have seen an increase in the downtown core of parking rates, and we've seen an urban center in recent years that has had parking pricing put into place. And it's a shift that's taking place, but it's going to be over a number of years.
Well, that's an interesting study, and I'm sure that you're not going to be done with it for quite a while. It's going to be an ongoing study, yes?
Yeah, absolutely.
In the meantime, thank you very much for participating in our workshop
thank
and
you.
for
Great.
giving us your ideas.
Oh, thank you. It's been a pleasure.